After taking a job as the sole English teacher in a remote, isolated mountain village, I began receiving welcome gifts on my doorstep each morning, intricate little carvings and handmade sweets. I soon realized these gifts correspond to private conversations I've had inside my own home, and the locals' friendly smiles now seem to hide a shared, unnerving knowledge of my every move. My name is Audrey, and I came to the village of Ain to disappear. I'd romanticized the idea, crafting a fantasy of misty mountains and quiet contemplation, a place where the noise of my past life in Chicago couldn't reach me. The job posting had seemed like a sign. English instructor for the INA Community Initiative. The village wasn't on any tourist map, a tiny cluster of dark timbered houses nestled deep in a valley, perpetually cradled by fog. My arrival was met with a display of profound, almost theatrical politeness. The village head, an elderly man named Mr. Ishikawa with eyes that seemed to hold the quiet history of the mountains, greeted me with a deep bow. He showed me to my new home, a traditional kaminka, a farmhouse of dark wood and paper screens that smelled of cedar and damp earth. The house was beautiful, a relic of a forgotten time. It had a single, sprawling room with tatami mat floors and a sunken hearth, the irori, in the center. Mr. Ishikawa explained that the house was a gift from the community, a place for me to feel welcome. His smile was warm, but his eyes lingered on my face a moment too long, an unnerving act of appraisal. The first gifts were charming. On my first morning, I found a small, beautifully wrapped box on my ngawa, the narrow wooden porch. Inside was a delicate wagashi, a sweet confection shaped like a cherry blossom. It was a gesture of welcome, a perfect embodiment of the Japanese hospitality I had read about. The next day, it was a small kokeshi doll, its simple, limbless form painted with an intricate floral kimono. Its head was a perfect sphere, its expression a serene, painted-on smile. I placed it on the mantelpiece above the hearth, a tiny, silent guardian for my new home. The initial charm began to curdle in the second week. I was on a video call with my sister, complaining about the little frustrations of my new life. "The house is amazing," I'd said, pacing across the tatami mats. "But there's this one floorboard, right by the kitchen screen, that squeaks every single time I step on it. It's driving me insane." We laughed about it, and the conversation moved on. The next morning, the gift on my porch was different. It was a small, unwrapped block of cedar, expertly carved into a wedge. It was smooth, fragrant, and precisely the size needed to silence a loose floorboard. I stared at it, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Coincidence, I told myself. A lucky guess. I fixed the floorboard. The wedge fit perfectly. The squeak was gone. But the silence that replaced it felt heavy, watchful. A few days later, I was feeling a pang of homesickness, a craving for some familiar comfort. I was talking to myself, a habit I'd developed in the profound quiet of the village. God, what I wouldn't give for a bar of dark chocolate with sea salt, I murmured to the empty room, the words swallowed by the old wood of the house. The following morning, nestled in a small bamboo leaf on my porch, was a single, perfect square of dark chocolate, flecked with coarse crystals of sea salt. It was an expensive, imported brand, something that couldn't possibly be found in the village's tiny, lone market. The knot in my stomach was now a cold, writhing serpent of fear. They were listening, the entire village. The polite smiles and deep bows were a facade, a mask for an invasive, communal surveillance. The thought was so absurd, so paranoid, that I almost dismissed it. But the evidence was right there, melting slightly in the morning sun. I began to test them. I started a frantic, silent search of the house, looking for a microphone, a hidden camera, anything. I ran my fingers along the dark wooden beams, tapped on the paper screens, lifted the tatami mats. I found nothing but dust and the ghosts of 100 years of quiet living. The house was old, I reasoned. The walls were paper. Perhaps sound just traveled in a strange way. Maybe the old woman next door, Mrs. Sato, simply overheard me. It was a desperate, flimsy explanation, and I knew it. My lessons at the small community hall became exercises in paranoia. The children were sweet and eager to learn, but the faces of their parents, who often sat in the back of the room, had changed. Their smiles were the same, but their eyes were different. They were knowing. It was the same look Mr. Ishikawa had given me upon my arrival. The look of an owner, not a host. I decided to perform a definitive test. One evening, I stood in the very center of my house and spoke clearly into the still air. "I'm feeling so lonely here," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I wish I had a pet, a little bird maybe, a yellow canary to keep me company." I barely slept that night, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a morbid curiosity. What would they do? How would they respond to such a specific, impossible request? The morning sun cast long, distorted shadows across the valley. I slid open my porch screen with a shaking hand. There, on the wooden planks, sat an antique birdcage, its brass bars tarnished with age. The small door was unlatched, hanging open. Inside, on the floor of the cage, was a single bright yellow feather. I felt a wave of nausea. The message was no longer just, "We are listening." It was, "We can provide." It was a demonstration of power, a quiet, terrifying threat. They hadn't given me a bird. They had given me a cage and a symbol of a life they could just as easily provide as they could take away. My idyllic escape had become a prison. Every villager was a warden, every polite greeting a reminder of my captivity. The rustling leaves in the forest sounded like whispers. The fog that clung to the valley felt like a shroud, cutting me off from the outside world, a world where privacy still existed. I packed a small bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it. I had to leave. I would walk to the main road, hitch a ride, disappear back into the anonymity I had so foolishly tried to escape. As I stepped out of my house, my bag clutched in my hand, I saw Mrs. Sato tending to the garden in her front yard. She looked up, her face wrinkling into a familiar, gentle smile. "Leaving so soon, Audrey-san?" she asked, her voice light and pleasant. "But you only just arrived. Please don't forget your doll." She gestured with her chin. On my porch, next to the empty birdcage, sat the Kokeshi doll from my first week. It wasn't on the mantelpiece where I had left it. It was outside, and in its small, painted hand, it now held a single, bright yellow feather. As a foreign student living in Tokyo, I started noticing my transit pass, Suica card, was accumulating charges for trips I never took, perfectly mirroring my own, but always a few minutes ahead. Someone out there has a copy of my digital life, and they are using the city's vast anonymous train system to prove they are always waiting for me just around the next corner. My name is Chloe, and for my first few months in Tokyo, the city felt like an ocean. I was a single drop of water, moving with the tides of a million other anonymous lives. I found comfort in that anonymity, in the silent, orderly crush of the subway, where you could stand inches from someone and be a universe away. My Suica card was my key to this world, a single tap that granted me passage through the city's sprawling, intricate veins. The illusion of anonymity shattered when I decided to get serious about my budget. I was sitting in my tiny one-room apartment in Koenji, cross-referencing my online bank statement with my Suica's travel history. That's when I saw the first anomaly. A 160 yen charge from a convenience store in Ikebukuro. I hadn't been to Ikebukuro in over a week. I dismissed it as a system error, a stray bit of data from someone else's transaction. But the next day there was another. A short trip on the Tozai line from Takadanobaba to Waseda. I'd spent my entire day in my university's library in Shinjuku. A prickle of unease started at the base of my neck. I began to check the history obsessively, every single night. The stray charges weren't random. A terrifying pattern began to emerge. They were a shadow of my own movements. If I took the Chuo line from my apartment to Tokyo Station, the phantom card would log the exact same journey, but its timestamp was always 5 to 10 minutes earlier. If I bought a bottle of green tea from a platform vending machine in Shibuya, the shadow card would log the purchase of a canned coffee from the machine right next to it, moments before I arrived. Someone hadn't just stolen my card number. They had created a digital doppelganger, a ghost in the machine that was living my life, but always one step ahead. The vast, impersonal city suddenly felt claustrophobic, like a cage I was sharing with an invisible predator. The train became a place of torment. I would scan the faces of the silent, uniformed students and exhausted salarymen, my heart pounding. Was it him? Was it her? Every person who looked at me for a second too long became a suspect. The stalker had weaponized the city's anonymity, turning it from a shield into a hunting ground. I tried to break the pattern, to outsmart the ghost. One Tuesday, I made a plan to meet a friend in Kichijoji, but at the last second, as the train doors were closing, I jumped off at Shinjuku and boarded a random express train heading south towards Yokohama. There was no way anyone could have predicted the move. I spent the afternoon in Yokohama's Chinatown, feeling a fragile sense of victory. That night, I checked the transaction history, my hands trembling. The victory turned to ash in my mouth. The shadow card had logged a trip to Yokohama an hour before I'd even left my apartment. It had paid for a single pork bun at a famous stall, the very one I had eaten at. It knew where I was going before I did. My paranoia began to bleed into the rest of my life. I felt a constant, prickling sensation of being watched. I would change my walking route home from the station every day, but I'd still feel a presence in the shadows of the narrow residential streets. The digital haunting escalated into a physical one. I was set to meet my study group at a cafe in Jimbocho, the city's book district. 10 minutes before I arrived, a message popped up in our group chat from my friend, Emmy. "Chloe, who was that man you sent? He was very strange." My blood ran cold. I typed back, "What man? I'm still on the subway." "He came in a few minutes ago," Emmy replied. "He said you were running late and wanted to give me this to keep me company." She sent a photo. It was a copy of an old, leather-bound book. The title was The Watcher. It was sitting on the cafe table where I was supposed to be. The stalker was no longer content to be a ghost in the machine. They were interacting with my life, sending messengers, leaving breadcrumbs of terror that only I could understand. They were proving that their reach extended beyond the digital realm. I went to the police. I sat in a small, sterile room and tried to explain the situation to a tired-looking officer. I showed him the transaction logs, the text messages. He was polite but dismissive, his eyes glazed over with skepticism. A stolen card number? A prank? He gave me a form to fill out and told me to change my passwords. As I was leaving the police station, defeated and humiliated, my phone buzzed with an email from an anonymous account. The subject line was 3 simple words: "I told you." The email contained a single attachment. It was a sound file. With a shaking finger, I pressed play. I heard the muffled, indistinct sounds of a conversation. It took me a moment to realize what I was listening to. It was a recording of me in the police station, talking to the officer, my voice thin and desperate. The recording ended with the sound of a door closing, and then a soft male chuckle. He had been there, in the station with me, listening. I ran. I left my apartment, my friends, my studies. I bought a plane ticket and fled back to the United States. I destroyed my phone, deleted my accounts, and tried to erase my digital footprint. I live in a small town now, thousands of miles from the neon glow of Tokyo. I pay for everything in cash. I don't use public transportation. I have rebuilt my life around the principle of being untraceable. But sometimes when I check my American bank account online, I see it. A single pending charge for 140 yen. It's the base fare for the Tokyo subway system. It always disappears after a day, a digital ghost, a reminder from the other side of the world. It's a message that says, "I'm still here, I'm still watching, I'm still waiting for you." I live in a modern Tokyo apartment building with paper-thin walls, and every single night I hear my neighbor on the 7th floor meticulously recreating my daily routine. The sound of my keys in the lock, my teacup being placed on the counter, even the specific rhythm of my typing. The building manager insists the apartment next to mine has been vacant for years. My name is Yuna. I work as a financial analyst, a job that demands order and precision, and I chose my apartment for the same reason. The building was a sleek, minimalist tower in Shiodome, a monument of steel and glass that promised quiet, efficient living. My unit, 7A, was a sterile white box, a blank canvas where I could build a life of predictable, peaceful routine. The illusion of peace lasted exactly 1 week. The building was preternaturally quiet, the hallways carpeted and silent, the elevators whispering between floors. But the walls separating the units were thin, a common compromise in modern Japanese construction. And through those thin walls, I began to hear my neighbor in 7B. It started with the mundane. I would come home from work, slide my key into the lock, and step inside. A few seconds later, I would hear the identical sequence from next door, the scrape of a key, the solid thud of a closing door. It was uncanny, but I dismissed it as coincidence. We were two professionals, likely on a similar schedule. But the mimicry grew more specific. I have a particular routine when I get home. I place my keys in a ceramic bowl on the entryway cabinet. It makes a distinct, sharp clatter. Seconds later, the same clatter would echo from 7B. I would fill my electric kettle, and moments later the sound of running water, then the soft click of the kettle turning on, would seep through the wall. The sounds weren't just similar, they were identical. The same duration, the same rhythm, the same faint resonance. It was as if my apartment had an echo, a ghostly acoustic twin that lived on the other side of the plaster. I began to suspect I was losing my mind. One evening, I decided to conduct an experiment. I sat at my desk and created a unique, meaningless pattern. I tapped my pen against my wooden desk 5 times quickly, paused for 2 seconds, then tapped twice slowly. Tap, 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 tap. I held my breath, listening to the oppressive silence. Then, it came. A perfect replication of the sound from 7B. Tap, 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 tap. The mimicry was conscious. It was deliberate. The next morning, my heart pounding, I went to see the building manager, a meticulously polite man named Mr. Koga. I explained the situation, feeling the paranoia rise in my own voice. He listened patiently, then gave me a placating smile. "Yuna-san, I believe there must be a misunderstanding," he said, turning his computer monitor towards me. He showed me the building's official tenant registry. The entry for apartment 7B was stark and empty. "The unit has been vacant since construction was completed," he explained. "The initial tenant had to relocate for work. No one has lived there. No one even has the key aside from myself." His words did not comfort me. They terrified me. If the apartment was empty, then who or what was I hearing every night? The mimicry became more invasive, more personal. It was no longer just my actions. It was me. I was quietly reading a novel, and I whispered a particularly beautiful sentence aloud to myself. From the other side of the wall, I heard a distorted, guttural whisper repeat the same words back to me. I work from home some days, and the sound of my typing, the specific staccato rhythm of my fingers on the keyboard, would be mirrored perfectly. It felt like my very existence was being absorbed, analyzed, and replicated by an unseen entity. The sterile white walls of my apartment began to feel like the inside of a laboratory cage, and I was the subject. I tried to find rational explanations. I contacted an acoustic engineer who spent a day in my apartment with sophisticated listening devices. He confirmed the sounds were originating from 7B, but his equipment couldn't explain their nature. He found no evidence of strange resonances or structural anomalies. He left, baffled, after charging me a significant fee for his time. One night, the terror reached its peak. I was taking a glass of water from the cupboard when my hand slipped. The glass fell to the floor, shattering on the polished tiles. Kuso, I swore under my breath, a sharp curse of frustration. I knelt to pick up the pieces, my hands shaking. For a moment, there was only silence from next door. The mimic had stopped. A sliver of relief pierced through my fear. Maybe it was over. Then, I heard it. First, the impossibly clear, high-fidelity sound of a glass shattering on a hard floor. And then, a perfect imitation of my curse, spoken in my own voice, my own inflection. But it wasn't my voice. It was deeper, harsher, a grotesque parody. It was the whisper from before, but now it had learned to speak like me. That was the breaking point. A wave of pure, primal rage washed over me. I scrambled to my feet and hammered my fists against the shared wall, screaming, my voice raw with terror and fury. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The silence on the other side stretched for an agonizingly long time. I stood there, panting, my knuckles raw. For the first time, the response was not an echo. A voice, calm and deep and terrifyingly close, seeped through the plaster. It said, "I don't want anything from you. I want everything that is you." I fled that night with nothing but my purse and my life. I broke my lease, forfeiting a massive deposit. I moved to a different ward, to an older, low-rise building with thick concrete walls, a place that felt solid and real. For months, there was only silence. I began to heal. I told myself it was a psychotic break, a hallucination brought on by stress and loneliness. The rational explanation was, for the first time, more comforting than the truth. Last night, I was unpacking the last of my boxes. I set a small ceramic teacup on my new kitchen counter. It made a soft, familiar clinking sound. I froze. From the other side of the thick concrete wall, a sound returned. The soft, familiar clink of a teacup being placed on a counter. It has found me.